The earth is sacred. Upon it grows life and everything that sustains life. Trees, vegetation, animals, and us, humans. From the earth we were risen, and the earth we shall all soon return. Some in peace, some in terrible, horrific agony. The act of burying the dead is holy, as it has been for thousands of years, as it most likely has been when we were not even considered as humans. For only in death can we ever be truly one, even if we have a myriad of ways of doing such sacred duty that span back throughout our history. Although not all traditions place the deceased beneath the ground, it will find its way there someday. In some Nordic traditions, they may set their dead out into the sea, the water, but they too will sink and find the earth once more. The Tibetan Buddhists may have what is called sky burials, where the bodies left to the elements for animals to feed on. Yet those same animals will also one day return to the earth as the dead themselves, as nutrients for the soil, as offerings. And this is true for all that have and will pass. The ground we stand on has seen the carcasses of innumerable beings that once were. It serves as their gate to pass through. It is their right to do as such. But what if we commit a transgression, a heresy upon this venerable act? What if the living trespasses the earth? Premature burial, what we commonly call now as being buried alive, is, as the name entails, when a person returns to the earth, whether by accident, by force, or by intention. The fear of this phenomena is called tapophobia, and it is unsurprisingly a prevalent fear among people, as it can also be linked to claustrophobia, which was actually supposed to be the topic of this video, but I found this one intriguing enough to stand, or rather lie, on its own. Maybe it is my human nature of being fascinated with the unknown that led me to this rabbit hole, a forever curiosity for the end of life. What intrigued me about it was the inherent perversion it had to what we know as tradition, the taboo, and the fact that there are multiple instances where people have experienced this. Those who may have woken up, unable to move, with sounds of wet soil pounding upon their caskets. There is an account of Emperor Zeno of Rome, noted by Byzantine historians in the 11th and 12th century, in which they tell of the story where the emperor, due to either his stupor from drinking or illness, was buried alive. In Constantinople, within the hallowed halls of the Church of Holy Apostles, rings the desperate knocking on marble and the pleas of the emperor, begging for the living outside his sarcophagus to have pity on him. His wife, the Empress Ariadne, refused to answer his calls for mercy, as she bore hatred towards her husband. This story, however, is almost absolutely a myth, yet it has become somewhat of a cautionary tale to people who know of it. And unfortunately, caution in declaring the dead has been overlooked in a couple of circumstances. Clinical errors are bound to happen. Maybe not as much in the modern age, but back then, back when people were using chainsaws for childbirth and drills for lobotomy, yeah, no, Chief, we probably did chuck regular old Joe 6 feet under at some point, and most of the cases were before we recommended cigarettes as the cure-all. But, to their credit, most of the recorded instances of premature burial were rather reasonable. Such was the case of a man simply known as Jenkins. On the 21st of February, 1885, the New York Times published an article titled, "A Man Buried Alive, What His Friends Discovered When the Coffin Was Opened." Here it was stated that after several weeks of fever, the man Jenkins passed away on the 20th of January that year. He had lost his ability to speak, his flesh cold and clammy, his heart and pulse still. The man was, in any person's eyes, long gone. The day after, he was promptly buried. Now, in this case, I'm not sure if it was creative embellishing of the time, but it was written on the article that when they were preparing to bury Jenkins, he didn't have the notable rigidity of a cadaver, and when he was put in the coffin, he was quote-unquote as limber as a live man. Rumors inevitably spread about this, that there was a mistake, that Jenkins was accidentally buried alive. It wasn't until the 10th of February when the wooden coffin was brought out of the sacred earth once more with the purpose of relocating the interment at the family burying ground. It was at this point that they decided to open the coffin to check if Jenkins was in any condition for the 20-mile drive. What they discovered was Jenkins lying face down, a great quantity of his hair pulled from his head, his coffin's interior lined with scratch marks. This story is to be taken with a grain of salt. It was published over 100 years ago, and sources that can corroborate this report are almost impossible to find. It does set a precedent, however, that most stories of people buried alive promptly return to the earth after their discovery. But there are some reports, some myths, if you will, of people rising from their casket. It was a hot summer for the people of Blackville, South Carolina in 1915. Normal as any summer would be. A funeral was held somewhere in the area. A celebration of life, if you may, for a woman named S.E. Dunbar. She was, at the time of passing, 30 years old, succumbing to a fatal episode of epilepsy. The doctor on the case, Dr. D.K. Briggs, was too late to accommodate Dunbar, and she was promptly declared dead. They planned for the funeral to be held the following day at 11 a.m., so as to allow Essie's sister enough time to travel from the neighboring town. The morning of her interment, Essie was placed in a wooden coffin. 3 preachers spearheaded the service and stretched it as long as possible because, at that time, Essie's sister had still not arrived. It went on, and eventually the service ended and the family decided to finally bury the deceased. After a few minutes, Essie's sister arrived. It was too late, however, as the coffin had been lowered and buried with dirt. The sister begged the preachers. She begged to see her sister one final time. Eventually, they gave in and agreed to exhume the coffin. They dug up the dirt, lifted the coffin, and unscrewed it. To the shock of the sister and the attendees, the presumed dead body of Essie Dunbar sat up and smiled. She lived until the age of 55, buried for the second and final time on May 22, 1962. To tell you honestly, I believe this story even less than the prior. One, I haven't seen any newspaper reports of the story other than her second burial. 2, I mean, come on, the story added that the 3 ministers, out of shock, fell backwards into the freshly dug up grave. It's a literal slapstick skit. This story is a subject of harsh skepticism, as what reports of live burial are privy to, and it seems that all of them are just that, myths and tales of old. Most of them are. It was the 1st of September, 1937. Angelo Hayes, who at the time was a 19-year-old and had a penchant for speeding on motorbikes. That day was no different. Racing through the streets of St. Quentin de Chalais. Unfortunately, he ran alongside death for too long and crashed headfirst into a brick wall, deforming his face and presumably ending his life. Due to the disfiguration of his visage, a closed casket service was done, and 3 days after the accident, Angelo was offered unto the earth. But something was fishy. 2 weeks before the crash, Angelo's father had apparently taken out a life insurance policy of $200,000. The insurance investigators on the case requested a full autopsy report, toxicology, and investigators' report. Nothing turned up, which prompted the insurance investigators to exhume the body 2 days after the funeral. The body, which was still warm. It turned out that Angelo Hayes was still alive. His body's system was shut down and was in a full coma, requiring only minimal oxygen, which allowed him to survive for that long. The man then made a full recovery after proper medical care. Following this incident, Angelo Hayes then had the idea of inventing a security coffin in the case of an accidental burial similar to what he has gone through, packed with all of the necessities such as a small refrigerator and oven. In any case, the man wasn't out of his mind to create such a thing. Though he fundamentally slept through the majority of his stay underground, the thought of waking up in such a confined space is a legitimate fear. A fear that has spawned numerous precautionary measures. There is an account made by Nicephorus of the 7th century emperor of Byzantine, Heraclius, in which he, probably due to the aforementioned entombment of Emperor Zeno, commanded that his sarcophagus be left open for 3 days after his interment. In 1854, Thomas Purcell was a firefighter in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and had somewhat of a phobia for being buried alive, and due to that intimate fear of returning to the earth early, he designed a peculiar burial for him and his family, a mausoleum. The Purcell family vault for the dead, embedded on a hill at the Wildwood Cemetery. The vaults were designed with escape hatches that could be opened from the inside, an air supply for the burial trespasser, and it was lined with felt to prevent injury inflicted to oneself. Yet still, in spite of the many precautions people have made, people still have this macabre fascination of returning to the earth prematurely. Some are done as stunts, which in my opinion is just weird, but some are done as testament to how twisted and perverted human evil can be. Some can be thought of as justified practices of execution due to crime. From what I've gathered, being buried alive is a popular punishment for criminals who have done abhorrent crimes, one of which that was mentioned frequently was this crime. There is something in Swedish called this, which apparently literally means live into earth. As in old Scandinavian laws, especially in the Swedish provincial areas, it was possible that men who committed this crime would be buried unto the earth, along with the animal they had sullied. There is an account in 1611 about a man in the Sönerbro district in Sweden who was given the death sentence from his defiling of a horse. He was set to either be burned at the stake or to be returned to the earth along with the animal. Yet we do not know of his fate, as the document surrounding this incident was lost to time. However, in 1616, we learn of an 18-year-old farmhand from Sweden who was buried alive along with the cow he committed the crime with. Unlike the prior accounts, the court record shows that in January of that year, Tufred, the man who has committed the depravity, was lived into earth inside a large stone mound. In learning of these events, I felt bad for the animals, for as quickly justice was given to them, so too was it taken away. Yet not all were done out of sense of righteousness. Most of those who would subject another person to trespassing the realm of the dead did not do it out of justified obligation. Well, rather, they did, but only through their own misshapen lens. It is no secret now, the countless atrocities done by those who thought it was divine will to persecute who they perceive as heretics. In the Spanish Netherlands era, around the 16th century, Anabaptism was a popular belief a lot of people had in those areas, but as the name of the country entails, it was under the influence of Spain, which was of course a Catholic-centric influence. It is no surprise to us now that a lot of persecution occurred at that time. One prolific example of such persecution was done to a woman named Anna Utenhoven, an Anabaptist woman martyred for her faith. She worked as a servant in Brussels, and it was said that she neither attended any masses nor confession, which prompted the parish priest to brand her as a heretic. Still, she held on to her beliefs, and when asked to renounce her faith, she refused. On the 21st of December 1594, Anna Utenhoven, under the orders of a priest, was arrested by civil authorities. For about 3 years, she was held in, often visited by Archbishop Matthias Jovius, a so-called protector of Catholicism. He visited Anna in the hopes of convincing her to recant her faith. His attempts were unsuccessful, planting fears in his mind that this Anabaptist woman was spreading heresy along the prison and should be stopped, either through her conversion or through her death. It was, according to the law of those times, prescribed to bury heretical women alive. Anna's execution was then urged, and by July 1597, Anna was visited by Jesuits, who offered Anna 6 months to make up her mind and convert to Catholicism. Anna refused. July 17, 1597, Anna Utenhoven was buried alive. As dirt piled up upon her body, a priest kept convincing her to forsake her faith. Still, the martyr refused and remained steadfast. She returned to the earth, bearing what she held to be true, in spite of her branding as a heretic. This was the last time a live burial was used as an execution method. Apparently, it was largely frowned upon, and in 1609, heretics were instead subjected into exile. The earth is sacred, and returning to it is a right. Yet it does seem that even in this simple act, we find ways to blaspheme. Countless more tales exist of intentional live burials, from stories spawned from war to accounts of cruelty of the mafia. Frightening stories, to be sure, and probably due to these trespasses, numerous times have we been smitten by the earth itself. Yet these are stories to be told another time. As I have mentioned earlier, this video is more of a branch of a bigger topic I wanted to cover. A small video, more likened to a throwaway probably, but I do hope you still enjoyed it. I will be doing these often in between the longer videos I have planned, so be sure to stick around and subscribe.